Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video I'm going to be talking about God Emperor of Dune, which is the fourth book in the Dune series. 4 of 6, so 2 more to go after this one. So this book takes place about 3,500 years after the events of Children of Dune, and Leto, in his sort of semi-immortal way, is still around and is the God Emperor. So obviously the vast majority of the characters we've gotten to know are not directly involved in the story anymore, but are historical figures to the common people in this world. So the hints we get about what's happened in this huge time gap in between these books comes through, Leto himself and the bits of history we pick up along the way into Modes, the official Leto-approved history, I suppose, and the things he's personally contributed to writing history, and the oral history, which seems to, in general, be pretty accurate. And the oral history kind of guides some of the rebellious forces on Dune. But it's not really Dune anymore also, and all of this time the desert's gone, the worms are gone, it's sort of this lush, completely different, unrecognizable landscape. But we do get some hints that the changes that have occurred on the planet are maybe not completely irreversible. So, Leto. I know I said in my last video that the character that was least interesting to me in Children of Dune was Leto, and he's the only one from that book who's still alive. But again, like I said in that video, Leto himself is not the most interesting to me, just because being all-knowing, while it's like heady and philosophical in a lot of ways when we're in Leto's head, it's more interesting how characters react to him. But Leto has undergone a physical transformation in the 3,500 years since he took on the sand trout skin, and he's morphed into a giant worm. So he's huge, he's not really recognizably human anymore, excepting his face. His limbs have been absorbed, all of his organs and everything have kind of merged with this worm body in a way that, to separate would be to die. And so we see that as a result of this, Leto has a kind of dual nature, in that there is still the man in him, obviously a very remarkable man with like all of his powers of vision and the golden path that he's trying to follow. But there's this other part of him that it seems he doesn't always have complete control over, which is the worm. And the worm occasionally lashes out in violence. So the main problem that Leto seems to be facing in this book is his struggle to hold on to his humanity. No one around him sees Leto as human, whether they see him as a god or they see him as some sort of unthinkable monster. But the humanity and the feelings and the love he has felt for people isn't really recognized. So you see him really clinging to that humanity as he feels himself becoming more and more of the worm and less of a person. And the monstrosity of this transformation that he took on, and of course the, torment of living for so many years, we really see the sacrifice that Leto made at the end of Children of Dune to save humanity. And that adds a lot more weight to the conversations him and Ghani were having in Children of Dune about how one of them would have to do this thing, and how they were both willing to do it if it came to it. I think when we were reading Children of Dune, there wasn't really a lot of context for those conversations. This book certainly provides that. Yes, Leto's using his many years in the world to guide humanity on this golden path, So in his rule, there's been really unprecedented peace, especially if you look at it on the big picture of what the universe was like pre and post Emperor Leto. But we can see, the way the Golden Path is going and how Leto describes it to other characters is that he's going to be gone one day. Dune, the worms, everything will return as a result of his death. There'll be famine and hardship and struggle, and then out of survival of the fittest, a better, more alive humanity will emerge. So we definitely get a few more ideas about what exactly the Golden Path is in this one. So the only other recognizable character that is still around this many years later is Duncan Idaho, sort of. So Leto has been sort of commissioning all of these Duncan Idaho Golas. So his entire rule, every time a Duncan Idaho dies, he replaces it with another. And often it seems the Duncan Idahos have died at Leto's own hands because inevitably they always rebel against Leto. The circumstances are different, the way they do it is different, but the Duncan Idahos seem to always come to the conclusion that Leto shouldn't exist, that he's controlling everyone. So the concept of him just coming back over and over again is really interesting, especially when we sort of see the end of one Duncan Idaho and the beginning of one who's the Duncan Idaho we see for most of the book. You can see how the different circumstances they're put in and maybe some changes in how they're being made, who knows, result in slightly different variations. Like for instance, there's a note on one of the pages that Duncan Idaho, leading Leto's army, the fish speakers, is teaching them these sort of secret Atreides hand signals, which he had never done before, hinting that maybe he sensed some more immediate danger on this reincarnation. But Duncan's just like really, really sad. I mean, he's been very sad in other lives in these books, but he talks about how knowing that his life kind of doesn't mean anything, that because it's not finite and because he's going to be brought back over and over again, sort of the magic of knowing this is the only time, this is the only day you have is completely lost. So Duncan Idaho feels like he has no control over anything, not even death, because Leto's just going to bring him back again, which offers, I think, a clever little parallel to the Idaho River that is clearly named after him and has been added onto the terrain of Arrakis, in that the river is sort of controlled and unnatural, and it doesn't get to be the wild thing that it's meant to. So let's talk about some of the new characters we meet, starting with Moneo Atreides, who is Leto's #1 advisor. He was a rebel against Leto in his youth, as apparently many of the Atreides are. Then they are tested, and he became Leto's truest believer. So he really truly believes in the Golden Path right up until the end. That's what he's striving to do. He has his job, his duty. He's kind of one of those characters who's following orders. But being sort of one of the quieter characters in this, he's really intriguing, in part because he has probably the most direct interactions with Leto over the course of the book. So we see a lot of what's going on through his perspective, and in part because he also has this kind of sadness in him where he's just tired and he's just ready for peace and ready for everything to be over. And so there's this thing about Moneo and that he won't take the spice. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is that he doesn't seem to want to lengthen his life, which is one of the purposes of the spice. Again, he's ready and willing for it to be over, basically. But another reason is he's an Atreides, and he understands that the spice affects the Atreides bloodline very differently than other people, and that he might see the future, right? When he's tested by Leto, he enters the spice trance and sees the golden path, and he believes in it, and he wants to help Leto do whatever it takes to make the horrors that could happen not happen. But he doesn't want to experience that again. He's really afraid of it. Like, seeing the golden path and seeing all the other possibilities and seeing everything that Leto sees is a great burden, really. So Moneo is much happier to serve. And then we have Siona, who is Moneo's daughter, and also happens to be the culmination of the ultimate goal of Leto's breeding program. So we got hints at the end of the last book that Leto was planning to take over this breeding program with the Atreides. We didn't really know to what end, and really it doesn't become clear until later in this book what that end is. But essentially, Siona cannot be detected by the Oracle, as they say. Leto can't see her in his visions, can't see her decisions, can't see her future. Neither can the guild or anyone else who uses the spice for that purpose. So genetically, she's really the only person who has any chance at all of taking down Leto. And she's really important for carrying those genes on to the rest of the Atreides bloodline. Now, Siona is the ultimate rebel. She's really cool and interesting and has so much potential to be a great character. So the opening scene of this book, which I think is a great, really exciting, really cinematic opening scene, shows Siona and her friends, her rebel allies, breaking into the Citadel and stealing the plans for the city. And they also come across these journals of Leto's, which I will talk about more. And then there's this chase in a forest, and there are these wolves, which, you know, is an interesting way to open because we're seeing firsthand how the landscape of the planet has changed. And we're also sort of getting these hints about the unrest of it all. And then, you know, we're just introduced to Siona by her first name initially. And once she escapes, we discover that she is Siona Atreides, and that Atreides has turned on Atreides, and it's really exciting. It's a great way to open the story. So Siona's really exciting, and you want to get to know her more, but the problem is that she's in the beginning and she's in the end, and she's kind of completely out of the way in the middle, so I feel like she's not as developed as I would like her to be. I wish I could have seen a lot more of her. But anyways, she has to be tested by Leto II towards the end of the book. She also does the spice trance and sees the golden path, and part of her test is also surviving the Fremen Way and walking across the last little bit of desert that Leto's preserved and having to conserve her water and live like that for a few days. So it seems like Leto's trying to awaken those instincts in her. And I mean, you have to wonder, Leto can't see exactly what Siona's going to do, what her decisions are going to be, but you do wonder if he knows what's coming and he's preparing her for it. Then another character introduced in this book who's closely tied with Siona and her plotline is Nayla. And Nayla is one of the fish speakers, which is an all-female army serving Leto, and they are completely devoted to him. Now there is some sort of iffy discussion of why there's an all-female army, you know, about sort of the essential differences between men and women, which is kind of, like, it can't go anywhere good. Like, this thing about how men are loyal to the army itself and like the fraternity of it all, but women are loyal to a leader and women need a leader. It's like, I don't know that we need all that. Like they could just be a female army and it could be cool for not weird reasons. But anyways, Nayla's set up to be really important in the plot, and she does have an important role at the end. Her motivations are interesting because she really is a true believer in Leto, and she is very strong and resourceful and very, very devoted to him. Like, her faith cannot be shaken. And her order from Leto is to do everything Siona says, to follow every order, no matter what it is, even if it's an order that could potentially hurt Leto. So obviously that creates an interesting moral dilemma for Nayla. But again, similar to Siona, we have like a really cool introduction and opening to this character. We don't see her for forever, and then she kind of pops up at the end. And then has kind of a really anticlimactic ending where sort of the worst happens for her and we don't even get to figure out how she feels about it. Like, I don't know. I wish I knew more about Nayla, and I wish I knew more about Siona. I wish they had been more involved in the plot in like the middle part of the book. Because honestly, the middle part of the book was a lot of just Leto talking and being very philosophical and heady and stuff. And it was interesting. I mean, I don't really mind these thematic explorations, but I just wish I could have seen more interactions among these very interesting individuals that have been presented in this book. So an important element to God Emperor of Dune are these stolen journals that Siona and her friends take from the Citadel. So Leto makes reference to the journals a lot and sort of his legacy and his message to the world after he's gone. Siona reads these journals, and that deepens her understanding of Leto, which I think it's really important that she really understands him before the ending happens. And as Frank Herbert tends to do, they sort of play a historic role in this. These stolen journals are cited in the epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter, and they're sort of referenced as something that was shared with the general public a little bit later in the timeline and shined new light on how people saw Leto and how they saw the history of humanity up to that point. So again, this idea of what is history and what is fact and what changes in the act of recording history comes up, and it's a really interesting theme that we've seen in all of the Dune books. So the main conflict begins with delegations from all these different factions in the universe coming to Leto, as they do once every 10 years, to meet and basically argue for how much spice allowance they're going to get. Because at this point, Leto has a complete monopoly. I mean, there's no worms left, and he has a hoard that he's sitting on, basically. So we have the Ixians, who are particularly notable in this book. They sort of have a delicate balance with the God Emperor in that they are creating the technology that's supposed to be, you know, forbidden, but some of it they are making for Leto, so they're kind of towing the line there. We sort of get hints throughout that they're actively developing technology to reduce the universe's spice reliance so that everyone can be like truly independent from Leto, kind of making him obsolete. So that's an obvious threat, but one that Leto himself doesn't seem overly concerned about. So the Ixians' big chess move is the creation of Hwi Noree. Again, I say this every Dune video. I don't know how to say any of these names. But essentially, Malky another Ixian, you know, wanting to take down Leto and also being someone who really understood him in the way that Siona begins to understand him towards the end of the book. He is involved with this Ixian experiment to create Hwi Noree, not from birth, but through technology. And Hwi Noree is made to be the exact opposite of Malky and is therefore extremely honest and gentle and beautiful and all of these things. So their goal was to make someone who would be an ideal mate for Leto, in that they have a theory that Leto has emotions and he has loved before and may love again, which would be a weakness. And they're absolutely right. Hwi Noree awakens this humanity in Leto, and he starts to feel all of these emotions so much stronger than he's felt them in thousands of years, because he's in love with this woman. And Hwi Noree, she's an interesting character. She's very perceptive. She has a bit of the Bene Gesserit training. She can read people really well, and she seems to understand Leto immediately. And despite what her creators intended, she really does care for Leto. Every time she shows up in a scene, though, her outfit is immediately described, which doesn't seem to happen with all the characters, but whatever. But then there's a little wrinkle with Hwi Noree in that there's also an attraction between her and the latest iteration of Duncan Idaho, which the book doesn't explicitly say if the Ixians were trying to do that. I mean, with the kind of mind games that tend to come up in Dune, my instinct is to say yes, their intention was to create a mate that Leto and Duncan would like. But yeah, Leto decides that he's going to marry Hwi Noree. He's all invested in her emotionally. He starts to react to things much more emotionally, and it kind of cracks a little bit in people seeing him as a god to see him feeling things as a man would. And Hwi Noree really starts this snowball that brings about the end of this book. So I think even though Leto doesn't know what Siona's going to do, he can't know what she's going to do, I think he must have some awareness of how his life is going to come to an end and the manner in which it has to come to an end for the golden path to continue. He shares that with Siona. I think Siona believes in the golden path, but she doesn't want Leto to be involved in it anymore. She sees him as a tyrant, and maybe sees what he sees, and that his death is a necessary step in the golden path. So in her getting to know Leto and understanding him, she discovers that water is the way to end him. And it's the way he has to end, because that's the only way the sand trout encased in his skin will sort of escape and spread. And I guess it's the only way that worms can ever come back on Dune again. So in their big sort of caravan going to this fake Fremen village for the wedding of Leto and Hwi Noree, Duncan and Siona plot to take out a bridge as they're crossing, and Nayla is actually ordered to be the one to pull that final shot. And Nayla, all along in her head, is still thinking, well, this is a test. Leto will perform a miracle. I couldn't possibly hurt him. He told me to follow Siona's orders no matter what. So in this attack, Hwi Noree dies. We see sort of the beginnings of it happening from Moneo's perspective as he falls to, again, sort of finding that last piece that he's kind of been craving for a while now. And we see Leto fall in the water. We see the sand trout rip away from him and leave him as this bloody, disintegrating pulp. It's very gross. Leto's whole existence in this book is gross. It is gross that he is a giant worm, his death is also gross. And it's extra gruesome because, as is explained earlier in the book, Leto's not really dead, and that his consciousness is going to be trapped in every worm and every sand trout forever, but he will have no action and nothing to do it. So there's all these little trapped, agonized Leto consciousnesses and all of these creatures because he was so melded to the sand trout skin. So really we're left with Duncan and Siona, Duncan being the ideal mate to carry on Siona's special traits and the Atreides line, and therefore the golden path. Which is fine. I don't know how I feel about the way Siona's story ends, only because Ghani's ended the exact same way in the last book, and the women are basically just reduced to being breeders at the end of these books. Like, their sole value is in carrying on these bloodlines, and if it happened once, sure, but the fact that it happened twice, both characters being really interesting and complicated, it's a little disappointing. But yeah, after the events of this, the golden path will continue, which makes you think that Leto knew that his end was potentially coming, even if maybe he didn't know the exact manner of it. Because it's never been about him living forever, it's been about the golden path, which is a long road. It'll take thousands of years to get to the place that Leto sees, and it starts with famine and hardship, but the idea is that humanity will be better on the other side of it. And hopefully, eventually, the worms and Dune and the desert will return, and Arrakis will be as it was when we first met it in the first Dune book. It's gone through so many changes, and I feel ready to read a book where it's a desert again, and where the people are more like the way the Fremen were, because right now, you know, there's nothing authentically Fremen left in this world. So overall, comparing this to the other books I've read so far, it's probably my least favorite. Mostly because we're just so far removed from the characters we initially met. It feels remote. Leto's kind of whatever to be the character that carries over into this one. And I just really liked Children of Dune. It felt like such a good ending that, you know, this one feels like kind of a bonus story and not really like it's integral to the main Dune story, which is fine. I really don't know what 2 more books are going to be about. I've already started the next one, and it's 1,500 years in the future after this one, so again, all the characters you might potentially be invested in are going to be gone. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the ending felt a little unsatisfying. Again, there are always really interesting characters introduced in Dune. The beginning was exciting, the ending was exciting. The themes brought up were interesting. We expanded upon, again, what it's like to be a god on Earth, or at least to be perceived as one. I mean, even more so for Leto than Muad'Dib, because, you know, he's physically not really like a human anymore. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on God Emperor of Dune. I have started book 5, which is Heretics of Dune, which I will be probably making a video about soon. Okay, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.